I'm LaShawn Jefferson. I'm the Senior Executive Director of Perry Roll House. For those of you who were with us yesterday for our conversation on Australia's leadership role on climate change policy with Australia's former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, and Penn Professor Michael Mann, welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're in for a very, very rich discussion. And not to make you jealous, but we had a little bit of a private meeting right before this public meeting. And this is going to be very exciting. And you're very lucky to be sitting in the audience today. So thank you for joining us today for an ambassadors roundtable on navigating a fracturing economic order. This afternoon's roundtable is the second of 3 programs for Perry Roll House's 2022 Global Order Colloquium, the focus of which is a fracturing world, the future of globalization. Today's roundtable will tackle the difficult questions that each country across the globe is facing after the economic disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic and challenges to globalization. We have ambassadors from the world's most critical regions, South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. It's now my distinct honor to welcome Ambassador Kumar Mirpuri, Ambassador Hilda Suka Mafudze, and Ambassador Andres Augusto Duran. By way of background, and you have more of this or details in your program, Ambassador Mirpuri became Singapore's ambassador to the United States in 2012. Prior to his appointment, he served as ambassador to Indonesia from 2006 to 2012, High Commissioner to Malaysia from 2002 to 2006, and High Commissioner to Australia from 2000 to 2002. A career diplomat, he joined Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1984. Ambassador Suka Mafudze has been the permanent representative of the African Union to the United States since November of 2020. She is a career diplomat with experience that spans the African continent. Prior to her current posting, she helped lead diplomacy for more than 2 decades in a variety of top government positions in her home country of Zimbabwe. From 2000 to 2005, she served as an elected member of the Parliament of Zimbabwe and is well known as the quiet champion of democracy. She's held ambassadorial positions representing her country in Sudan and in South Sudan. Ambassador Andres Augusto Duran was appointed as the ambassador of Uruguay to the United States in September of 2020. He has over 20 years of experience in the private sector. Prior to taking office as ambassador, he acted as executive advisor for Latin America in the private equity and real estate division of Ashmore Group. Previously, he was a founding partner of the law firm Braggart and Duran from 2011 to 2018, and a partner and associate of the law firm Hughes & Hughes from 1998 to 2011. Our moderator for today's roundtable, and we are extraordinarily lucky to have this, is Edward Wong of the New York Times, who is a diplomatic correspondent with the New York Times and reports on foreign policy from Washington, D.C. He lives in one of my most favorite areas of Washington, D.C., which is not Adams Morgan, but is Mount Pleasant, in case anyone cares. He has worked for the Times for more than 23 years, reporting for 13 of those as an international correspondent and bureau chief from China and Iraq. I welcome the panel to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear all here? Is this okay? We're pleased today to have 3 distinguished ambassadors here. I think that I've been reading a lot of headlines recently saying that we're in a world in crises right now, and you can take your pick of which crisis is at the top of the pile. But at this time, I think that in the forefront of a lot of conversations, we hear people talking about what different countries are doing to deal with the pandemic, with the slowdown in the global economy, with wars that are taking place even in faraway regions. And they're talking about how all this is impacting their regions and the people in their borders. So here we have 3 ambassadors who are dealing with these issues in their own countries and are also interacting with the US government to improve relations and also to take part in a global effort to deal with the crises. So I think we'll hear from them first, and then we'll have a conversation and take questions from the audience. If we can start with Ambassador Duran, you have some remarks?
Sure. Thank you, Edward. Thank you to the Perry Warehouse for this kind invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. We are obviously living in a very complex world, an uncertain world. First the pandemic, then the war in Ukraine, already existing challenges like global climate change, the geopolitical tensions that we have seen over the last years between the two global superpowers. So we feel that we are living in a kind of perfect storm, unfortunately. And obviously all this has big economic consequences, big consequences to the global economic order. The markets of food and energy have been affected worldwide. The supply chains have been disrupted everywhere. Inflation rates, level of debt, migration flows, and so on. And Latin America, the region where I come from, has been particularly affected during the last couple of years. Latin America, unfortunately, doesn't have a single developed country in the whole hemisphere. I'm not counting, obviously, the United States and Canada, but in the whole Americas, there's not a single developed country. And the already existing challenges that we had in terms of education, health, infrastructure, poverty, and so on, are more evident nowadays. My country, Uruguay, fortunately, has very good positive things and indicators. We are the country with the best GDP in per capita in the region, the best country with the best Gini coefficient, the country with the widest middle class in the Americas, and overall is, I would say, the most stable and business-friendly country in the region. But nonetheless, it is stuck in the middle income trap. And we strongly believe that it is with more openness to the world, with less protectionism, with more international trade and foreign investment flows, and with stronger partnerships around the world and collaboration, that we can have more prosperity and sustainable growth. And there comes our relationship with the United States, which is key for us. It's very important, and we are working very hard on that in very important initiatives, but unfortunately, it is at a suboptimal level, and that's why we want and we are seeking to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United States, such as we are doing with other countries and regions of the world. So, in a nutshell, despite all this turmoil, these complex times and negative news, I think globalization is here to stay, even more in this digital and technological world that we are living. And diplomacy has a key role to play to navigate in these troubled waters.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me back to Perry World House. I remember I spoke here at the opening of Perry World House in 2016, before many of you were students over here, and it's nice to come back, particularly to see the campus being so busy with people, and a globalized campus. You know, we speak about the fracturing of globalized. You walk down the streets of Philadelphia or around UPenn, the world is at your doorstep. So let me tell you about Singapore and globalization, because like US universities, Singapore has benefited from a world of globalization. We got our independence in 1965, a very fraught independence. You know, now as with the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, Singapore remembers that we were actually British subjects for a very long time. They left in place many of the elements of administration and government that we still use. But in 1965, Singapore was a poor, developing country that no one had any expectation would succeed. We had unemployment. The British had a military base that they were leaving from Singapore. We had no jobs. Singapore is a country without any resources. We have to import our energy, we import our water, we import our food. What did we have to do? We were very fortunate to be in a region that started building up the opportunities of globalization underwritten by the United States. The US, of course, was fighting communism in Vietnam and in Indochina, but Singapore started to engage with the globalized world because of the rules, because of the institutions that the US had put in place. The post-World War II institutions like the UN, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, GATT, which became the World Trade Organization, we saw that as that opportunity to grow our country. We focused, the lack of resources remains a problem, but the main resource we had are people. We focused on education. We focused on very pragmatic national policies to bring people in to invest in Singapore. We are now the hub of significant amount of investments from around the world, particularly from the US. Not because we have a big population, but because by using Singapore, by using the connectivity, by using the rule of law that we follow, by using the IP protection, US companies and other companies go out from Singapore into the rest of Asia. And we are now in the middle of a thriving region of Asia, and the other countries in Asia see the potential for growth and they want to strike that growth. So when you tell us in Asia that we're looking at a deglobalized world, a fractured world, a bifurcated world, that is not a happy outcome for us. Because everyone in the US, in the whole of Asia, want their people to be successful. And that really comes, we think, through economic interdependence, through economic links, through following the rules, and in many ways, like Singapore had its start, underwritten by the United States. The global superpower which has led the way, and we hope that they will continue to lead the way in that. But the region is not standing still. We are fortunate that there is another emerging superpower in our region, China, which has been putting forward economic ideas and proposals, participating in economic arrangements with the region. Singapore has free trade agreements both with the United States and with China. We also have India in our region, another emerging power that Singapore also has done an FTA with, because we think that the more links of trade and economic ties that we can build, the more we can build connectivity and interdependence, the better that it will be. Yes, there's all these concerns that we have, obviously the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the tensions between the US and China, concerns around climate change and pandemics and other issues. But these can only be resolved if we work closer together rather than separate apart. There are not two planets for us to deal with climate change, one planet bifurcated on the other side for the other planet to deal with climate. We have to deal with climate change as one issue. COVID showed us 2 years ago that these are global problems that we all have to deal with together. So while we can lament about deglobalization and fracturing of the world, I think as diplomats, as government officials, as citizens, I think we all have to work to try and bring the world together, because then countries like Singapore that succeeded in this model can then work with other countries so that they can succeed as well. But we've got to build institutions. We've got to maybe relook at multilateralism. We've got to look at things like the G20 and others where we can work onto these areas. So I want to think about this more positively rather than negatively, because that's the only way that we can navigate this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I just want to remind the crowd, the participants, that Africa is a continent of 55 member states. There are 55 countries in Africa. I happen to be leading as the ambassador of the 55 member states, but I'm working with other ambassadors who have come to the US bilaterally to relate with America. I would say the stage where Africa is today, we actually don't see, we will not entertain a world that is fracturing. Globalization has been there. And right now, the minute we're thinking of these challenges like a fracturing world, the future of globalization, thinking on the negatives, this has come a time for Africa also to realize who they are and saying, here we are, and we want to relate with all of you. It has come at a time when Africa is yearning to integrate. We are coming out of colonialism. Some may say colonialism happened a long time ago, but colonialism has made us to be in little pieces. Imagine at some point in time immemorial, Africa was one. Those 55 member states we're talking of were not there. It was one. Who knows, maybe we were speaking the same language. We were doing things together. We were trading amongst ourselves. And this is where we are. It's African Union leading our continent to say, we want to integrate. We're looking for borderless Africa at the end of the day. One day we find we are borderless. By so doing, when we are together, we see that we will be a richer people, economically, socially, health-wise. In the integration, we are looking at this digitalization that we're talking of today, where we are saying that's where the world is heading to. And looking at Africa, it may take some time, but the good thing is we have come up with the tools. We have Agenda 2063, a 50-year plan with its flagships, which include Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which include the NEPAD, which include all other agencies in all areas of social, economic, you name it, issues to do with health and all that. Once we have all those things in place, like the digitalization that I'm talking about, is we integrate all that, we foresee Africa coming of age. By 2030, this is our target. The way we have 50 is by 2030, we're seeing Africa getting to a level whereby other nations are, though that's a number of nations. When I come to the relationships, we're seeing America revitalizing the relationship with Africa. And we actually boast of a young population. 60% of the population of Africa is the younger people. We are taking advantage of that demography. And they're saying we run with this demography. And we see Africa being a place where people will source for labor, in the way labor will be available. And we are saying America is revitalizing its relationship with Africa. Just recently, the Biden-Harris administration has announced that we should come up with the second summit. The first summit was done in 2014 during the Obama era. This is the second leader summit, which is coming in December from 13 to 15 December, where America is showing we are together, we want to work with you. And all we are saying as Africa is we are at a level where we are saying those who have interest in us, come, let's work together. We're not looking at, is this China, India, or whoever. For those who want to work with us, Africa is so vast. You actually may not believe, I come from the southern of Africa, the SADC region. If I tell you I've not set foot in the western region of Africa, you will say, oh, what is she talking about? It's that vast. It's that vast, so much that maybe you touch on a country that is closer to the West. But for you to finish all the 55 member states, it's so vast. And we are taking advantage of all that. We are taking advantage of our demography, of the younger people. We are taking advantage of where we are with our diversity. The 55 member states are all the diversities in the languages that we speak, which are different. And we are saying we come together and work together and make a difference. I think I'll stop here for the time being.
Great, thank you very much to all three ambassadors for your insights. I wanted to start off by talking about the subject of globalization and how it's changed because of domestic politics in different countries around the world. We've obviously seen the pandemic and the war in Ukraine have a big impact on the idea of globalization, but also in a lot of countries, there's been movements within the countries to rethink ideas of globalization in recent years. I think any observer of US politics will say that one of the most surprising things we've seen in America is a turn by the mainstream elements in both political parties against ideas of free trade, globalization, this so-called Washington consensus that existed in the 1990s. I was wondering, I want to ask all three of you a two-part question. In your countries, have you seen a similar shift in conversation over globalization and free trade? And then as ambassadors who deal with Washington and US foreign policy and trade agreements, how do you address this in talks with American politicians and officials? For example, Ambassador Duran, you said you're trying to work on a free trade. You would like the U.S. to enter into a free trade agreement with Uruguay, but at the moment there seems to be, a turn against the idea of free trade by elements in both parties. So how do you deal with that in your work in Washington? So
I deal with that speaking with whoever wants to hear me, and every day, and trying to convince why it makes sense, why we think it's a win-win. There's a wide perception by many people that the U.S. has somehow disengaged from the Americas or Latin America, at least from Mexico to the south, except some areas like the Northern Triangle. And there's also acknowledgement by many politicians that needs to be fixed. And there are many initiatives right now in the pipeline that the current government is taking to try to address this situation. There's a term that has been around for during the last times about nearshoring that goes more to your first question. So how the US could leverage their affinity or the connection to the Americas in general to have more resilient supply chains, because the way they were working didn't work so well, apparently, in their opinion, and because all these shifts that we are seeing in the world. So it's a hard job. It's a daily job, but we are confident. We are making progress, and we hope to, in case of Uruguay, take our economic integration to the next level with a free trade agreement with the United States.
can I ask Ambassador Suka Mafudze to follow up on that? Because you probably represent, as you were saying, 55 countries across the continent, and there must be varying opinions on globalization and free trade among different countries and different leaders. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Let me say, definitely there is a reset of the world order. And this reset has come at a time when Africa is also saying, here we are. We want a seat at the table. And we want to be involved into the decision making of the world. And I will repeat what I've said earlier, that how do you explain 55 member states saying, the world saying, oh, they're gonna suffer. Now the supply chain has been disrupted because there's war between Russia and the Ukraine. To Africa, it has come as an advantage, I must say. It can be painful to begin with, but it is when we have realized the power that we have. We have young people in the continent. All it means is to reset and make sure they have a buy-in in developing themselves, in growing their own food on the continent. Today, there was an outcry to say wheat is in short supply in Africa. And you know what it does? It causes these conflicts. And we have said, yes, there's been a disruption, but let it be short-lived. This is time to get these young people, for them to play around in the innovative hubs, and they build on maybe mechanization to do with agriculture. Yes, you know, Africa has always been growing its own food, but until at a time when the world turned out to be globalized, of course, it made some people not to take certain directions. And it made nations to think, oh, we can do other things. We can get wheat from Russia. We can get wheat from Ukraine easily and all that. And we have learned such a big lesson right now. And we're putting that all in order. And the tools that I've said, we're working on them. The Agenda 2063 that I talked about, it's got all issues to do with when we integrate, what are we talking about? We're going to do business amongst ourselves. And to attract foreign direct investment, how do we attract? We attract the foreign direct investment because we will be trading amongst ourselves. That attracts other nations to say, let's go do business with Africa. And with the population that is here in the US, the demand is bigger. And with our small countries, I'll talk of Lesotho, Swaziland, very small countries, being approached to say, okay, can you do a production on 1, 2, 3? It will not be enough. So if countries come together and they work on the economies of scale, I see Africa at a certain point, and I see this supply chain less painful. It will be there, but less painful. But for globalization, it's an ongoing thing. We're building on relations. Thank you.
Edward, you asked first about anti-globalization views in our own countries. In Singapore, there is no choice but to be globalized. We can't create a moat around us. I said earlier how we have to import almost everything. That the government leads the way in telling people about globalization. In fact, encouraging globalization works two ways. It's not just the connectivity of people coming to Singapore, it's people from Singapore going out. If you want to run a business in Singapore, 5.5 million people, and that's the maximum you can do, then you're not going to provide to the world. So if you're in a digital business, you have to go global. And we're encouraging people not just to do things in Singapore, but to go out. There is some resistance sometimes to labor mobility issues in the region of people moving around. But otherwise, for countries like Singapore, deglobalization is not an option. We have to trade. We engage with all countries on trade. We participate as much as possible, from the WTO to regional arrangements to bilateral arrangements. But then you ask about being here in Washington. I've been here for 10 years, and I have seen the mood change very dramatically as trade was demonized by the political parties. When I got here in 2012, we were in the middle of negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership with the Obama administration, which was started under the Bush administration. So this was not an agreement that was only one party or the other. The Bush administration started in 2008, and the Obama administration carried on. And we was a very active engagement to reduce trade barriers among the countries of the Pacific: Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Malaysia, all coming together because they felt the barriers had to come down. By the time we came to the 2016 presidential election, both parties had disavowed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. President Trump, when he came into office in January 2017, pulled the US out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But you still needed those elements when the US relooked at NAFTA and recreated something called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. They actually took the TPP terms and put it in there. So we continue trying to push through. Yes, there is resistance, but the resistance, some of it is for good, genuine reasons. Some of it is, I think, just put up there because people they think that by closing the barriers, the US can be better. I'm very pleased that this administration has now started something called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, launched in May this year when President Biden was in Japan. And to everyone's surprise, 13 countries said they want to join this. It means there is a demand for the US to do economic leadership in the region. And just last week, ministers of these 13 countries plus the US met in LA and came up with several pillars, including supply chains, including clean energy, including the fair economy, including trade, in order to pull this forward. So we continue to speak about these things, including, I can see the mood changing, that maybe there are opportunities for the US to engage with the region. The unfortunate part is that sometimes this is framed as challenging China. And I think that becomes the difficult part because the countries of the region also work with China. We are with China in APEC, in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So it's how can we do both with the US and China to create a more inclusive, trade-oriented world. But I still see some green shoots that we can work towards. So I'm a little bit more optimistic. Thank you.
Up on that comment about US and China and the idea of making a choice between two. In Washington, as you know, all three of you must know this, there's talk of the term great power competition these days. And I think that is now the framework through which the mainstream foreign policy makers in Washington see the world, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. What do you think of that framework? Do you think that it's valid? There's any validity in it? Do you think the U.S. is overstating, these U.S. policymakers are overstating what's going on in the world right now? And as you mentioned, do you feel that increasingly the U.S. or another power, possibly China, maybe another power, will force countries to make a choice?
We are negotiating a free trade agreement with China right now. At the same time that we are seeking the same with the US, we are formally negotiating a free trade agreement with China. And our view in the lines of my colleague here is that countries need to be open to the world as much as possible. And especially when it comes to US and China. There's no choice for us in Latin America in general. China has become the largest trading partner for every country in Latin America except one or two. And there's no return on that. It's true that in the US, sometimes things feel or seem to be in a sort of black or white situation, but I trust and I feel that will not continue or will be taken to extremes because it's not common sense. Recently, yesterday actually, I had lunch with a senator who is proposing a very interesting initiative for the Americas, and he told this shouldn't be a zero-sum game in respect to China, and I agree with that sort of approach. I also had comments from high-level officers from this administration telling that they are not concerned about our engagements with China because they feel that Uruguay is an example of how can we deal with both China and the US. So I think the key is to find the proper balance for the safety and prosperity of all.
I would want to think, yes, there's that kind of, like, there's more happening with China today, and why is that happening? I would want to think if there's need for competition. Go into Africa and do the best. I'll tell you this right now, that America's footprint is insignificant on the continent of Africa. And that's what we would want. We want more of the Americas on the continent. I'll not talk much about China is doing whatever it's doing on the continent, and I said it earlier that Africa is vast, and there's everything for everybody on the continent, for those who want to work with us. But the rule still stands to say time is no more of going into Africa and taking the resources and out. Someone goes and he says, we get this from Africa. Without that, what is due to us is Africa. We are saying we want mutually benefiting business opportunities. And yes, that talk is there, like on a daily basis in Washington, DC, China, America. But I would want to say, let's all come, let's see if people will not have enough. By the way, don't forget Africa is endowed with natural resources. And we're saying, let's build on that. Let's work together for those who want to work with Africa. Let's build on those resources and develop them to an extent to allow the development of Africa. And we are saying we have the tools on the ground. I talked of the Agenda 2063. I've talked of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is tasked with the integration of Africa, doing business amongst ourselves. And then not only amongst ourselves, but also with the world outside. Thank you.
There is a competitive dynamic between the US and China. And in many ways, the past few years in Washington has shown that dynamic. And I think that's natural. You have a superpower and you have an emerging superpower. It would be irresponsible for each of them not to pay attention to the other. And most of that, obviously, in security terms, the militaries will continue to build up. And so I think we have to live in a world in which there is going to be superpower competition. We're used to that during the Cold War, but the difference between the Cold War, between the US and the Soviet Union, was there was not that economic interdependence between the US and the Soviet Union. The Soviet trade with the US was minimal. Today, China is one of your largest trading partners. Most of us have iPhones in our pockets. It's probably built in China. That whole ecosystem of manufacturing and supply chains. You can relocate some to Vietnam, some to India, but China is still that hub for many of these things. So that competition is going to be there in security terms. It's going to be there in military terms. In Southeast Asia, it's actually quite different because China is a geographical fact. We're not going to wish the Chinese away. Most of China's trade comes through Southeast Asia, passing through Singapore, Straits of Malacca, up the South China Sea. There are energy resources. There are ethnic populations in Southeast Asia that have come from China over the past 200 years, well settled in Southeast Asia. And as we see the rise of China, there's almost a pride that China has become successful. And we're actually happier with a successful China than an unsuccessful China. Because we faced in Singapore and other Southeast Asian countries, Chinese efforts to sort of disrupt the governments of Southeast Asia. At the time, Singapore had a Malayan Communist Party. There were broadcasts coming out. So we prefer to have a successful China where our businesses can be there and their businesses come to our part of the world. We also want to have the US because, as I said at the start, that's how our growth came from. But we see the US as a resident power, a Pacific power, not just providing the security balance, but also providing the economic opportunities. And US companies that do come to Southeast Asia are not just doing this to manufacture for the US market. They want to sell GM and Ford cars in China. They want to sell products made in the region in China because the Chinese market is important. So there is a competitive dynamic. I think on the economic side, if we can take some of that competition away from the sensitivities and avoid a zero-sum sort of game that my colleague spoke about, avoid that sort of mentality and say, where can we work together? Yes, countries want to manufacture semiconductor chips in their own countries, but these are expensive propositions. And do you really have to manufacture the chip for your toaster in the United States? Or can that chip for the toaster be made somewhere else? Sure, for the missiles, you make it over here. I think let's be practical about where the economic competition is going to be, what needs to be done, and how can then a region like Southeast Asia, which is 600 million people, how can that be part of that conversation between the US and China rather than just being pulled apart because of the competition? I think that's what we want, and that's where some of the economic arrangements that we're trying to do, some of that focus on multilateralism, that's what we want to have. Yes, there will be competition, but how can we manage it? And particularly with some of the new issues coming up for us to deal with.
Thank you. We'll move on to audience questions in a few minutes. So if any of you have questions or are formulating them, please get ready. There's a mic in the back right there where you can step up to the mic right where that young man is and ask a question. And in fact, Ambassador Murpuri and the others just answered, by coincidence, the first question came over Zoom, which is how can countries balance their approach to international issues to avoid a polarized world? So people who are watching on Zoom, please send in your questions. We're seeing them also. I'll ask one question before we get to the audience, which is, Ambassador Duran, you mentioned the idea of nearshoring and moving supply chains closer to countries and to companies that, where companies have their headquarters or their major sites. During the pandemic, do you think that this has been a major or even a permanent shift in the idea of supply chains? And if so, is it a good thing for free trade and globalization, or is it a bad thing? I open this to all three of you.
So for a country, it is good in the sense that we see more opportunities that we didn't have before, and we are positioning ourselves as an innovation hub, as a technology hub, as a healthcare hub in South America, and working with our US friends on how can we leverage our partnerships so that the US and US companies can be more engaged with our ecosystems. So in that sense, it's positive. Obviously, the pandemic has shifted many things. The technology has shifted many things, and it's inevitable, and we are, taking the most of it and the opportunities that this brings.
Mafudze?
Yes, I would say the pandemic has taught us lessons. It has brought us together, and it has taught us that actually the future of globalization, it has shown that the future of globalization should be on the positive. Because if I'm a sickling, and you will also be a sickling. So I would say we have learned so many lessons around the COVID issues, and also that as we move on, we are saying there shouldn't be other regions that could be looked down upon, but regions that we look at the world as a one and they move together. I hope I've responded properly.
I think one unfortunate thing of the pandemic was it actually caused countries to start putting in place controls and export controls. If you are manufacturing masks, we're not going to sell it to anybody else because I have to supply my own population. If you are making vaccines, I need to give my own population a vaccine first before I can give it to anybody else. And that's fine if you're in the United States. The rest of the world still needs to have these vaccines and these masks and personal protective equipment. I think, so it has given rise, coming out of the pandemic, to a sense that countries need more resilient supply chains. That even a country like Singapore that relies on, we never put in place any export controls, anything being manufactured in Singapore, we do personal protective equipment, we do masks, as long as they met their contractual obligations, they could send it around. But we had, everyone starts thinking of resilience. What does resilience mean? Resilience means a loss of efficiency and higher cost. We just have to accept that. Because if I'm going to do something at home in Singapore that is cheaper to do somewhere else, but because of resilience, I have to do it in Singapore so that my population have it, it means the cost has to go up. There's just the economics cannot change. We cannot make it cheaper in Singapore. We're a high, expensive labor destination, expensive labor market, and the same with the US. As you bring the chips back to the United States, you have passed the CHIPS Act, you have to subsidize the manufacturing companies. That costs the taxpayer money. And as long as people accept that as we shorten supply chains, as we look at resilience, there will be a loss of efficiency and higher costs. But countries have to do that. I think as you anticipate, I think you will start to see some of that happening. Then comes the idea, as you speak about nearshoring or friendshoring, can you extend and stretch? The reason why supply chains went global was because of cost and efficiency. There's nothing that asked a company to go and do things in Vietnam or China, but except for cost and efficiency. Now, I think we need to find some ways in which we can extend the supply chains while keeping the resilience. And interestingly, even with all these developments during COVID, Singapore has seen more investments come in, particularly in the biotechnology sector, particularly making vaccines and others, because people still feel you do need a safe hub with connectivity that you can send it around. That these are not places that are going to shut down anytime that there is a pandemic. But I think these are things governments have to think about. There's no easy answer. We cannot go back to that world where everyone just went and found the cheapest destination to make things. But we need to work resilience, but anticipate the cost that come with that.
Thank you very much. Let's take our first question from the audience.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Thank you all for being here today. I wanted to talk a little bit about global public health. And I think about it in terms of what has come out of almost every region of the world. So Africa had the 2014 Ebola outbreak coming to the world, and we had monkeypox from even before that. In Asia, we had the swine flu, H1N1, we had the SARS outbreak. And we had Zika, which was believed to come out of Brazil. And so I just am wondering if you can talk a little bit about how each of these public health threats affected your country, your region, your continent, and what were some of the lessons learned, and how do you feel about the future of cooperation on global public health? Can we get there, or are countries is it just too difficult?
Great.
Listen
You
to
can talk about an entire continent. So.
Yeah, I would say global health is what we are calling for, where we have to pay attention. And I would say this has taught us as Africa that we have to manufacture our own vaccines. Hence, we have set up in each region, the 5 regions of Africa, we have set up places where we are developing the vaccines for these challenges. But as you know, if I can go back to a little bit to say, as you know, Africa did so well around the issues of COVID. And it was because they had systems already set, because they had gone through the Ebola, they had gone through Zika was in Brazil. They had gone through so many challenges of these communicable diseases, and they knew what to do whenever a disease come into being. And they remember there was prediction to say Africa will suffer at the end of the day, will lose, there'll be more people who will die because of this challenge of these diseases. But it didn't happen that way, because we had Africa CDC, which played a role of coordinating the 55 member states. And each day, there would be knowledge of what is happening in the continent and making sure the contact challenges were dealt with without any problems. And I would say there should be support to places like Africa in terms of ensuring we strengthen the health systems. Because at some point in time, there was talk that the challenges come from Africa when it didn't come from Africa. But we are saying, despite what people would think at the end of the day, but let's just have a world that is healthy, where we work together in fighting these challenges that we are experiencing as a people. That's what I can say.
Just a quick response, Edward. There's a whole value chain of global public health, vaccines, etc. I think we need to focus, and coming from Southeast Asia, where SARS was a big problem, COVID started in Asia as well. The first thing we really need is a public health information system that people can get to know things better before we start even thinking of vaccines and masks and everything like that. And I think we need to work with the WHO. I know that has been an organization that some people are not very pleased with. The only place where countries will share information about an outbreak of a new pandemic, even if it is localized, should be through the WHO, rather than us creating other systems. And once you get that information, then you can start taking the next step. If we cannot get even that first part of the value chain right, I'm afraid the rest is just going to be more problematic.
Comment, obviously the pandemic was a big test for Uruguay like everyone else, but our country emerged stronger with that test. We were able to engage the science and take decisions based on science, while at the same time managing the main components of the crisis, the economic, the sanitary, and the social one. And we believe that together with the already good health system that we had, and the digitalization of the medical system that we already had, now our biotechnology and our hub of healthcare is better positioned to serve the region and to collaborate more with other countries.
Great, thank you very much. Before you ask the question, you can also introduce yourself, so that would be great. So go ahead.
Sure. I'm a dual MBA MA student, and I must say it's my dream to move to Singapore after I finished my degree. I spent the summer there. It was lovely. One of my main interests, or something I'm hoping to study in my MA, is the impact of Chinese investment in other countries on US industry and whether or not that's pushing out US industry. And along that lines, I'm curious to know whether within your regions or countries, if you see the actions of US politicians or companies, and the same with China, actively trying to push out the other and promoting a more bifurcated world. For example, Chinese monopoly of mining in Africa, or the One Belt, One Road infrastructure initiatives.
I think that in Asia, what we want is higher standards. And whoever brings the higher standards into us is what we would accept. It's you define two groups of investors, the US and China. We're also a hub for a large number of European investments. We also have Latin American investments coming to Southeast Asia. And we want to have better quality so that as governments decide, say, an infrastructure project, what is the best way to do these things, rather than be left with no option but to take whatever's on the table. And once you get that, so Singapore has actually created an organization called Infrastructure Asia, which brings everyone together, governments, banks, accounting firms, consulting firms, so that there's better understanding of what a project may be. If investors come to us and they compete with each other, and countries get the jobs, they get the tax revenue, and I don't think there's any problem with that. Now, whether the Chinese and Americans are nudging each other out, I think, many of the Chinese investments in the region are really there more for resources because they've got enough manufacturing back home. The US investments in the region tend to be more on the manufacturing. So they're almost a different level of type. But I would say let's just get the higher standards. And I think that's the more important thing. It doesn't matter what the source of the investment may be. Then, banks will finance it. Once you get some private sector funding in as well, I think that may be a better way. And I hope you get to Singapore.
I will also take it from what the Excellency has said. At the end of the day, as I've also earlier said, competition breeds a perfection. And certainly countries will go for the best work that can be done. And that's it at the end of the day. When there's competition, who wins? And if what they've put in place is the right thing, the right systems, and all that, countries will buy in. And this is what I've said in forums here in the US, to say there's no need to really fear or feel the competition. A good product, when it comes on the table, everyone will come and pick the right product. And let's be on the ground and do it. And countries will be able to buy in for that which is positive, which is good. Thank you.
In Uruguay, we still don't have much Chinese investments, but we expect to have if we conclude the free trade agreement. But I fully agree with my colleagues. I mean, I think the correct approach is what makes sense and the standards of the investments, and not to put things on black or white or zero-sum game, as we were referring before.
Next
Thank
question.
you. My name is Michael Weisberg, faculty member here at the university. Your Excellencies, you've painted a very rosy picture, I think, of the situation, and I think when thinking about investment and trade, maybe it looks like that. So I'm curious about the international politics side, which you did touch on, but just to kind of focus our thinking, if one watches the UN over the last few months, you might think there's something more like the emergence of a new non-aligned movement. So just to take the example of votes around the Ukraine crisis. So in the first vote, one of your countries abstained. In the last vote, the one about kicking Russia out of the Human Rights Council, another one of your countries abstained. Well, I'll leave it to the audience to figure out which one voted yes both times. But it does seem as if the flip side of the kind of openness to whoever wants to bring the investment is kind of greater and greater sense of there's going to be a sort of something more like the non-aligned movement, and a lot of the world, the G77, just saying, hey, we're gonna stay out of this. And I just wondered how you react to that. I think that's what it looks like sometimes to countries like the United States.
My country was very clear at a multilateral level, at the UN, about the war in Ukraine and the violation of international law, as we understand, and we raise our voice clearly. These are more aspects for the UN ambassador than I, but that has been the situation in Uruguay. Political channels and these type of things are considered at these multilateral organizations, and bilateral trade is and relationships. It's a different channel, and I can speak more about my bilateral channel with the U.S. rather than more general political, but more or less that's my answer.
Singapore voted to criticize Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. And we also put in place sanctions, the only Southeast Asian country that put in place sanctions. Very unusual for us because we like the UN to put sanctions and we follow those sanctions, but because the UN Security Council was obviously gridlocked with the Russian veto, so we put in place sanctions. On the Human Rights Council vote, we did abstain, but we abstained because there was already an established process that had been launched a couple of weeks earlier. And we did not want to preempt that process by a vote in the Human Rights Council. That's what multilateralism is. It's going to be slow. It's going to be, you got to navigate it. You cannot pick and choose when you want an organization to do something if there's process. And this is the most important thing for small countries like Singapore and other small countries. Our vote to criticize Russia and our criticism of Russia was not framed in the way that many Western countries framed it of democracy versus autocracy. Our vote to criticize Russia was because of the UN principles, the UN Charter of Territorial Integrity, and that was the most important thing. And if the US did tomorrow invade a country and you violated the UN Charter, we will criticize the US as well. I think that's easy. That's the way small countries have to operate. We need to operate with certain rules, certain principles, and stick in the multilateralism. I think that framing of democracy versus autocracy, that was the early part of the war, I think that's shifted a little bit now. It instantly put the countries that did not vote with the US in the first vote as autocracies. These included India, these included many African countries, but why take that framing when the framing should really be what we all want? Territorial integrity, the UN Charter, focus on multilateralism. So we look at each vote independently, and then we decide how does it fit into our interests, rather than because someone's telling us to do something or the other. So it is important that we criticize the Russian invasion of Ukraine because of the nature of it. But then, because there are other multilateral processes, we wanted to follow those through. Thank you.
On the basis of Africa, it's the same that happened. African Union, the current chair of the African Union, which is Senegal, Macky Sall, President Macky Sall, and the chair of the African Union Commission, they issued a statement to condemn what Russia had done, violating the integrity, what do you call it? I'm short of the words, they're not coming out. Violating, going into other territory and violating, just going in there and starting up a war and all that. We have condemned what Russia did. But at the same time, yes, as the voting came into being at the UN, some other African countries abstained. Some other countries voted, some other countries behaved somehow. And that draws me back to what I said at first, that we are coming from colonialism and we are in pieces and we are trying to speak with one voice. But the one voice came out, the African Union, which all these 55 member states are members, spoke on behalf of those countries. That's violating territorial integrity. And at the same time, we had other countries coming out to say the voting didn't go very well. What happened with Africa? don't forget, even Russia worked with other countries on the continent to fight colonialism. So all those areas, if you go deeper with these issues, you find there were reasons around on what happened. But at the end of the day, the multilateralism will rule, will take a shape. And that's where we're heading to. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, so we'll take that and then we'll have some closing thoughts.
My name is Trudy Rubin. I'm a visiting fellow at Perry World House. I'm also the foreign affairs columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, the local newspaper, and I just spent 3 weeks in Ukraine, which is why, Madam Ambassador, I wanted to ask you this question. You mentioned the issue of the grain shipments being interrupted because of the war between Ukraine and Russia. And my question is this: how do the countries of the African Union regard this problem with the grain shipments? Russia invaded Ukraine and has blockaded the Black Sea. And yet it seems that the African nations see this more as an issue where the two countries are equally at fault. So I'm curious to ask you, how does Africa look at this? And how will Africa regard Russia if, as Vladimir Putin has threatened, Russia abrogates the agreement because he said falsely that all the grain is going to Europe? So who do you see as at fault here? And how does the multilateral system handle this? And how does Africa regard this whole situation? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And it helps in making me put things clearly where Africa stands at the moment. I'll still mention that Africa condemned what Russia did. And it's the Excellency here explained. He says, even if America violates another country, we still go back to the international law and say this is wrong. And this is what Africa did. African Union stood out on behalf of that, of all the 55 member states. And what did Africa do? Our leaders also went to meet Vladimir Putin to say to him, you cannot play with the issue of food. You cannot do all those machinations that you are doing. You better open up. The negotiations at first were done by the Africans, the leadership of Africa, to go and talk to Vladimir Putin. And they remember, even at first, America was also like, please, just talk to him if he wants to talk to you, Africa. And I remember going to another meeting where the talk was, we're looking for answers from Africa. Yes, my leaders went to Vladimir Putin to say, it's wrong, he should open up. But at the same time, soon after, the UN intervened and they made sure the grain, the whatever is moving properly. Things have gotten better right now. But the world stood up and said, Africa went to negotiate, to talk to Putin, and they're supping with Putin, and they're not forgetting that Putin had done something wrong. Which I have to put right the information here to say Africa stood and they said, no, this is wrong. But Africa went to negotiate, to say, open up the corridors, please, for our people will suffer. So I think I'll end there. Maybe others can also say more around it. But there's no way I can stand there and say, Russia is wrong, Ukraine is wrong, We have mentioned it as African Union at first to say they are wrong because they have gone to disturb a country, isn't it? So I'll end there.
So I'm always like edging in when the conversation gets at its best to wrap us up and to give our guests an astounding and loud round of applause.